Good morning and a warm welcome. Holly Shields here for Kalkine TV, reporting to you live from Sydney, and you're watching the Global Markets Roundup. Let's dive into some key highlights and happenings from yesterday, starting with the US market. Well, equity indexes across the globe were near flat on Tuesday as data showed slower than expected growth in China's economy last quarter, while 5-year Treasury yields rose to their highest levels since 2020. The MSCI's gauge of stocks across the globe shed 0.05%. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 and tech-heavy Nasdaq closed higher on Monday, October 18th, bolstered by gains in tech stocks and upbeat corporate earnings. The S&P 500 was up 0.34% as the Dow Jones fell 0.10%, the Nasdaq Composite rose 0.84%, and the small cap Russell 2000 was up 0.10%. The Dow Jones retreated on mixed global cues as new data showed that China's economy grew at its slowest pace in a year, rising by 4.9% year over year in the third quarter, from a 7.9% jump in the previous year as well. Analysts believe that power shortages, supply concerns, and upheavals in the property market slowed the growth rate. Market participants will be closely watching the quarterly earnings of big companies due to report this week. And overall, markets were upbeat after the better-than-expected quarterly results of major financial companies in the previous week. Analysts now expect at around a 32% jump in earnings of the S&P 500 companies in the latest quarter, according to Refinitiv data. Consumer discretionary and tech stocks led the gains in the S&P 500 index on Monday, as utilities and healthcare sectors were the bottom movers. Although only 4 of the 11 critical stock segments of the index stayed in the positive terrain. Moving on to the futures and commodities now, and gold futures were down 0.21%, as silver decreased 0.48% and copper fell as well 0.33%. Brent oil futures decreased by 0.93% to $84.07 a barrel, as WTI crude was down 0.28% to $81.50 US. Onto the bond markets now, and the 30-year Treasury bond yields were down 1.04%, while the 10-year bond yields rose 1.20%. And US dollar futures index increased as well 0.02%. Well, now it's time for a short break, but stay tuned because around the corner I'll be back with more info on the Asian and Australian market updates. Tune in to stay updated while on the move.
We will tell you where the crypto craze has reached,
where the property market is headed next,
what the world is doing to become more environmentally friendly,
apart from tracking the daily market charter.
Be on top of the latest news and announcements
with Kalkine TV. Hello and welcome back. I'm Holly and you're watching the Global Markets Roundup. European shares fell yesterday after weaker than expected growth data from China hit luxury stocks, while a relentless surge in commodity prices fueled worries about inflation spiraling out of control. The Pan-European Stock 600 index fell 0.5%, after an upbeat start to the quarterly earnings season drove its strongest weekly performance since March on Friday. The index fell after 3 straight sessions of gains, over which it jumped about 2.7%. The UK stock market was trading lower on the first day of a new week, and the key factor for which impacted the blue chip index was poor economic data from China. The country reported a decline in gross domestic product and industrial production in the third quarter of the year, which raised fears of a slowdown in the global growth affected by rising inflation and a surge in demand for energy. Playtech was up by over 57% after the company's board agreed to a £2.1 billion takeover bid from the Australia-based Aristocrat Leisure. The company's board agreed to a 680 pence per share bid following numerous negotiation rounds. And next up, CIMIC Atlantis Energy. Shares of the alternative energy provider were down over 14% after the company issued additional ordinary shares to the subscriber in relation to £300,000 in share placing. The new shares will trade along with the exiting ordinary shares from the 20th of October. And moving on to Fresnillo, the metal and mining company, whose stock was among the top gainers from the blue chip index, primarily due to a rise in precious metals in the international markets. Metal and mining related stocks continue to show growth following a rise in commodity prices globally. Japanese shares closed slightly lower on Monday as investors booked profits following a recent rally. Although automakers gained after Toyota Motors hinted that it could still hit its full-year output plan despite chip shortages. And the Nikkei share average inched down by 0.15% after posting its first weekly gain in the last 4 weeks. China's stocks closed lower as well on Monday as data showed growth in the world's second-largest economy hit a one-year low, while analysts did not expect imminent broad monetary policy support. The blue chip CS1300 index fell 1.2%, while the Shanghai Composite Index lost as well 0.1%. South Korean shares as well closed lower on Monday, ending a three-day rally, as China's economic growth in the third quarter hit a one-year low, while rising oil prices stoked inflation fears. The Kospi ended 0.28% lower, logging the first fall in 4 sessions. And Australian shares may give away most of Monday's gains after the latest Chinese data showed a slower than expected growth in the last quarter. Domestic shares may also fall today, likely hurt by losses in miners and energy space on the back of a sinking commodity price. The ASX 200 rose 0.25% in the previous session on Monday. Meanwhile, the New Zealand dollar rose against the greenback as well today as inflation jumped above expectations to a decade high, putting pressure on the central bank to accelerate its rate-rising cycle, which sent bond yields surging. The Kiwi dollar rose 0.14% after briefly testing resistance at the 0.7 cents level, a 4-week high as inflation numbers were released earlier in the session, and support lies at around 0.6 cents. The Aussie was trading slightly weaker at 0.7413 cents as economic data from China, for which the currency is used as a proxy for traders, printed behind expectations. And gold prices eased amid a rising US Treasury yield, and spot gold rose up 0.2%. Meanwhile, Bitcoin last rose 0.75% to just over $62,000. Well, that is all for now in the Global Markets Roundup, but keep watching Kalkine TV because we have many more updates coming your way. Holly Shields signing off.